You'll have to make your own dinner tonight. This is how my wife greeted me when I returned from work that Friday evening. Helen entered the living room, adjusting her earring. I'm going dancing with my friends. I looked at her in bewilderment. She wore a short black dress with a low neckline, supported by four thin straps that crossed over the shoulders. As she turned her back to me, I couldn't help but notice how the folds of her skirt fluttered around her hips. Then I saw the open cutout at the back, which made it clear that Helen was not wearing a bra. Are you going to dance dressed like this? Why? What's wrong with what I'm wearing? It's very stylish. I felt my anger rising, but knew I had to be careful what I said next if I wanted any chance of getting through to her. Your outfit is fine, but you're revealing too much. Don't you think you might attract the wrong kind of attention, especially from men? She snorted. If Nancy and I dance with men, I'm sure they'll be real gentlemen. You can't be sure of that. Who knows, maybe one of them will turn out to be the puppeteer, and you certainly don't want to attract his attention. The puppeteer was the nickname given to the killer who terrorized our area. Over the past year, he has attacked and strangled 8 young women. The only clue the police had was that each victim's rings were missing, suggesting that a madman was amassing a macabre collection. Helen's mocking response came in the voice of a little girl. "Oh, Daddy, is the boogeyman really coming for me?" Then her voice returned to its normal disdainful tone. "It's so pathetic that you try to control me with scary stories." Before she could continue, a car horn sounded outside. "I don't have time for this," she spat. "Nancy has arrived. Don't wait for me." And with these words, she left. "Damn it," I swore, standing alone in the living room with my fists clenched in helpless rage. This kind of disrespect had become more and more frequent lately, and I didn't know how much longer I could endure it. I loved Helen, but our relationship seemed to be going downhill for a long time. What happened to us? I thought. How did things get so bad? We were madly in love when we got married after graduation, and Helen was so supportive of me when I went to business school for my MBA. She took a job as a secretary to support us, which allowed me to complete my degree in 18 months. It wasn't easy for her, and I will always be grateful for her sacrifice. Then, while I was trying to find work, my father died, leaving the business to my brother Billy and me. Preferred Precision Moldings manufactured custom plastic parts for industrial use. The business had been in decline for some time, but Billy and I thought we could make something out of it. Billy took over production management, and I took over sales and general management. This is a specialized business built on relationships and results. Little by little, Billy and I began to rebuild our reputation as a quality supplier. She never said anything, but I knew Helen was disappointed that I didn't end up in an executive position at a Fortune 500 company in a major city. However, she tolerated my long hours and meager salaries without complaint. However, when the opportunity arose to move into the advertising business, she jumped at it and almost immediately showed an aptitude for the job. This was a boost for us at first. Her growing salary really helped our financial situation, and her growing self-confidence lifted her spirits. Over time, however, our relationship began to cool. She spent more and more time with her new work colleagues, especially Nancy, a divorcee whom I considered a bad influence. But Helen cared little or nothing about my concerns, as today's confrontation showed. Well, to hell with it, I thought. There's no way I'm going to sit at home and wait for her to come home. I don't know when. With these thoughts, I called my younger brother. "Hey, Billy, are you busy tonight? Okay, how about meeting at Louie's? Helen's out again, and I need some company." Louie was nearby, and I liked going there because it wasn't too noisy, and there was jazz playing in the background. They also made good burgers to go with alcohol. Billy was already waiting for me when I walked in, and he had a beer ready for me. "Judging by your voice," he chuckled, "I thought you might need it. What did your wife do this time to make you so angry?" I still thought of Billy as my little brother because he was 2 years younger than me. But he grew up and became as tall as me. Growing up, I always won our fights, but I doubt I could do that today. Now he was my friend and confidant. I took a long sip from the mug in front of me and then looked at him. What makes you think Helen did something to make me angry? He shook his head in understanding. It's always Helen lately. I don't know what's going on between you two, but that woman is definitely bugging you a lot. Is it that obvious? When he didn't answer, I sighed and shrugged. Everything was fine until she went to work for Browder's agency. At first, she was excited about the opportunity, and everything was very good between us. But the more time she spent in this world and with these people, the worse things got at home. She doesn't seem to respect me anymore. Nothing I do is good enough for her, and she takes every opportunity to leave me. Honestly, I'm starting to wonder why I married her. He grinned and crossed his arms over his chest. I know exactly why you married her, brother. I shook my head in disgust. You've always been lusty. Anyway, I haven't had much action in that area lately either. I don't know how much more of this I can tolerate. Billy turned and signaled to the waitress for another round. After she brought it, he leaned towards me and asked in a quiet voice, "Do you think Helen is cheating on you?" I took another long sip and my face twisted into a grimace. That's exactly what I think. The only thing I can't figure out is if she's cheating with someone or just getting random guys when she's with that bitch Nancy. I felt my anger rising and took another sip to calm myself down. Looking back, the relationship between us started to deteriorate after she took this new job. Now she always works late or goes to the office on weekends. It makes me think she's having an affair with someone at work. But she also keeps going with Nancy and won't tell me where they are or when they'll be home. Last weekend, she didn't come back until I went to bed, but insisted on taking a shower when she got home. She said she wanted to wash it off. The smell of cigarette smoke, but that sounded like an excuse. Billy looked at me carefully. Are you two going to get a divorce? I hit the table hard with my hand so that the beer mugs jumped. Damn, this is what really bugs me. Disrespect is bad enough. I couldn't stand her cheating. But if I divorce her, we'll have to split all our assets, and she'll get half my share of the business. Damn, Mickey, this really sucks, especially now that things are starting to pick up. That order you got last week could really pay off in a big way for us. I know, brother, and the thought of her walking away with a big piece of everything we've worked and toiled for really drives me crazy. I was now in full swing, and as the evening went on, I lost track of how many beers I drank. It didn't seem like much, but I still didn't eat. At one point, I vaguely remember Billy helping me to my car and driving me home. He dragged me halfway to the bedroom and threw me onto the bed. I kicked off my shoes, and that was the last thing I remembered. It was almost noon on Saturday when I finally woke up. Oh God, my head hurt so much, and there was a bitter taste in my mouth. I struggled to the bathroom, poured a glass of water, and took a handful of aspirin. Then I hurried to the kitchen to make myself breakfast before all that acid burned a hole in my stomach. After I finished eating, I called my brother. When he heard my voice, Billy laughed. I was wondering if you were still awake. Man, you really got drunk last night. Yeah, well, thanks for driving me home safely. I hope I didn't do anything crazy. How much did I drink anyway? I don't remember ever passing out like that, not even in college. He laughed again. It's all part of the service. Just remember that you owe me. Then his voice changed. So what did Helen say when you finally stood up? I straightened up sharply. Damn, Billy, I didn't see her. She definitely wasn't in bed when I woke up. I got up from the table and started walking around the house, talking to him to make sure. I don't think she came home last night. She's definitely not here right now, and her car is still in the garage. That bitch must have stayed all night. Damn it, I'm not going to take that kind of disrespect. Hey, take it easy, big brother. She might have a good explanation. Come to think of it, she probably spent the night at Nancy's. Why don't you call there? No, she has a phone, let her call me herself. I'm tired of looking for my own wife. I understand where you're coming from, brother, but don't make any decisions until you two have had a chance to discuss everything. I hear you, but honestly, I hope she doesn't show up anytime soon because I'm so mad at her right now that I don't know what I'd do. Anyway, thanks again for last night. Now, let me do some yard work. Maybe it'll cool me down a little. After I hung up, I changed into my work jeans and headed to the garage to get the lawnmower. When I sat down to put on my work boots, I was surprised to find them covered in mud. Where did this come from? I was surprised. I usually clean up after myself very carefully. I enjoy mowing the lawn because it gives me a chance to think without a lot of distractions. But this time I couldn't stop thinking about Helen and how angry I was at her behavior. This is not just disrespect, this is outright contempt. I really don't care whether she cheats on me or not. I'm not going to tolerate this kind of treatment. I finished my work at the station and checked my phone to make sure I hadn't missed her call. No missed calls, no messages. I watched a baseball game on TV, then went to the kitchen and made myself dinner from the leftovers. After that, I went back to the TV to watch a movie I had already seen once. Finally, I turned off the TV and picked up the phone. Okay, bitch, you win. I called her, but received a message that the phone was disconnected. Did she turn off her phone so I couldn't call her? Just unbelievable. I undressed and went to bed, but I couldn't fall asleep right away. The next morning, I woke up confused. My skin was damp and the sheets were damp. What made it worse was that my mood was gloomy and anxious. It seemed to me that I had been dreaming all night, and these dreams were very restless. I couldn't remember many of the details, but I knew I felt very angry at Helen. No, not anger, but hatred. It was really scary to remember how strong my emotions were. Even after I drank coffee and ate breakfast, I couldn't get rid of this terrible memory of the dreams, and I started to feel guilty. I tried to call Helen again, but again received the same message about the phone being disconnected. Overcoming my hostility, I called Nancy. It was obvious that I woke her up because it took a few seconds before she realized who I was. Nancy, is Helen there? No, she's not there. Was she with you yesterday? No, I thought she went home. She's not there. Nancy, this is important. When was the last time you saw Helen? It was Friday night. We were dancing at singles and doubles. I rolled my eyes. Singles and doubles was a real meat market. What time did you leave? Pause. Well, I left after midnight. Helen left with you. Long pause. Actually, I met a guy I liked, but Helen was having a good time and wanted to stay. She said she'd call an Uber when she was ready, so I left with the guy. So you haven't seen or heard from her since then? No, I didn't. Look, you're starting to scare me, Mickey. You really haven't heard from her all weekend. Nancy, I don't have time to talk now. I need to try to find my wife. I hung up and cursed, then called Billy and told him what Nancy said. Bro, that doesn't sound good. I think you should call the police and report her missing. Yeah, that makes sense. I'll let you know what they say. It turned out to be a complete waste of time. When I called the police station, the first thing the officer asked was when was the last time I saw Helen. When I told him it was Friday night, he interrupted me. Listen, buddy, you can't even file a missing person report until she's been gone for 3 days. Damn it, officer, I haven't seen or heard from her all weekend, and neither has her best friend. I'm afraid something might have happened to her. Listen, he said, don't worry too much. I've seen this dozens of times. Chances are you'll hear from her soon and everything will be fine. Just give it some time. I hung up. Maybe he's right, but that didn't reassure me. It wasn't like her. What if she had an accident? But if that were the case, the doctors would have called me, right? Anyway, I decided it couldn't hurt, so I called the local hospitals. Helen is not registered anywhere, and they have no unknown female patients. Another dead end. I went and bought myself some food, then hurried home to eat in case Helen showed up. While I was waiting, I tried to distract myself by watching TV, but couldn't concentrate. Finally, I gave up and went to bed. In some ways, Sunday night was worse than Saturday night. Again, I slept restlessly. What's worse is that this time I kept having the same dream. I was lost, making my way through the dark forest, loaded with a heavy burden. I didn't feel angry. Instead, I was overcome by a feeling of hopelessness and despair. The last time I woke up, it was still dark outside, but I still got up because I couldn't stand this feeling of depression. It took me breakfast and a few cups of coffee to start to shake off that ominous feeling. At 7:30 a.m., I called Billy. "Listen, I'm going to be late this morning. I still haven't seen or heard from Helen. I'm going to check at her office when it opens in case she shows up there. If not, I'm going to go to the police station and demand to see someone." That. "Okay, I'll hold the fort here. Good luck, brother, and hang in there." Half an hour later, I called Browder's agency and got through to Frankie, Helen's personal assistant. When I first heard about Frankie, I was a little jealous of the idea that Helen had a man as an assistant. Helen just laughed at me and said I was sexist, until I met Frankie at a corporate event. Frankie was short for Francesca, and like her nickname, Frankie was one of the least feminine women I've ever seen. She was not overweight, but she was tall and strong with an extremely masculine figure. Honestly, she looked like she could play guard on some college teams. She was also strong. The first time I shook her hand, she gave me a firm handshake that amazed me with its strength. Another thing I learned about Frankie was her absolute devotion to Helen. After seeing them together a few times, I decided that Frankie probably liked girls and had feelings for my wife. I asked Helen about this once, and she just laughed. "Of course she likes girls, but that doesn't bother me. In fact, that makes her perfect for my assistant. She'll do anything for me. She's more like a maid than an employee." Hearing Frankie's contralto voice on the phone brought back memories. "Hi, Frankie. This is Mickey Duncan. Is Helen in the office yet?" "Hello, Mr. Duncan. Good to hear your voice. No, your wife has not arrived yet. Should I tell her to call you when she arrives?" "Yes, please let him call first." Something in my voice probably didn't sound right to Frankie. "Is everything okay, Mr. Duncan?" To my horror, I found myself telling Frankie everything. How we had a fight when she left on Friday, and how I hadn't seen or heard from her all weekend. Frankie listened quietly until I finished. When she finally spoke, her voice was muffled and her tone was worried. "I'm really sorry to hear that." Her voice became even quieter. "I can't talk about it now, but strange things are happening here. If I were you, I'd talk to Mr. Benjamin Browder and find out what's going on with Helen." Suddenly, her voice became normal and loud again. "Yes, sir, that's correct. Mr. Browder will be in the office later this morning. Goodbye." I sat holding the phone and felt my blood pressure rise. I didn't like Darren Browder from the first meeting. He was one of those slimy, handsome guys who always seemed overconfident. He never missed an opportunity to brag about his advertising agency or himself, and was not shy about humiliating others. Perhaps these qualities made him a good advertising agent, but from my point of view, they made him an insecure and unattractive person. So what did Frankie mean when she said I should ask Dandy Darren questions? I had a hunch that I knew, and I was going to confront him as soon as possible. But first I had to get to the police station. The sergeant at the front counter wasn't very helpful, but I think I made enough noise that eventually a woman came out to me. "I'm Detective Nora Marshall," she introduced herself after the sergeant explained my problem. She looked young and inexperienced to me, but at least she was willing to listen, so I followed her to her table. I told my story again, but she didn't seem particularly responsive. When I gave her the photo of Helen, she leaned back in her chair and covered her mouth to yawn. This was the last straw for me. "Look, if you're too tired after the weekend, how about you let me talk to someone who's actually interested?" She leaned forward sharply, and her eyes sparkled. "If you think I don't care, Mr. Jins Duncan, you're sorely mistaken. I wouldn't have taken this position if I didn't really care. And for your information, The reason I yawned is because I worked all weekend and most of last night trying to track down a mentally ill young woman who ran away from her home. So calm down and tell me again why you think your wife is not just another runaway husband wasting police time. I felt terrible after that, but I straightened up and tried to explain why I was so concerned about Helen's disappearance. She's gone out with a friend before, but she hasn't stayed all night, and she's never gone the whole weekend. How often does she leave without you? I was confused. It's been happening almost every weekend lately. Marshall made a note on the notepad in front of her. Then she looked at me carefully. How would you describe your relationship with your wife? I looked at the table and sighed. Look, I'm not going to lie to you. Things have been a little tense lately. I looked at her. It seems like she's lost respect for me, you know. Do you two ever fight? Yeah, we had some pretty heated arguments from time to time. Have you ever hit her? I was shocked. God, no, I would never do that. She waited for me to continue, but I couldn't think of anything else to say. Finally, she sighed. Okay, Mr. Duncan, I'll add your wife to our missing persons list and distribute her photo to the patrols. If we find anything, I'll call you. I didn't want to say anything, but it just came out of my mouth. Don't you think there's a chance that she ended up with this puppeteer and... Look, I know what you're going through, but you can drive yourself crazy imagining unlikely scenarios. In the vast majority of cases like this, the missing spouse has simply decided they need time alone. After a while, they realize they can't solve your problems from a distance and return home. My advice to you is to stop worrying and go back to work. Let the professionals find your wife and bring her home, okay? Reluctantly, I nodded. She pulled out a card from a small bag. Here's my name and phone number. If she comes home or you hear from her, call me anytime, day or night. She handed me the card. We really care, even if you don't think we do. I took the card and nodded guiltily. Okay, Detective Marshall. Thank you. After I got out, I called Billy to let him know what I was going to do and then headed straight to Browder's agency. I've long had my suspicions about Darren Browder, and Frankie's cryptic comments made me even more determined to confront him. The secretary let me in because she recognized me, and as I walked past Helen's office, I stopped and raised my eyebrows, asking Frankie a silent question. She shook her head. Okay, I said quietly, then it's time for me to deal with Browder. She grabbed my hand and squeezed it. Good luck, she whispered. I walked down the hallway to Browder's office, rubbing my fingers. Damn, this woman is strong. Oh, Mr. Duncan, Browder's secretary exclaimed when I approached her desk. Is he there? I asked, and she frowned. Yes, but he's busy right now, and... Wait, you can't go in there. But I already walked in and saw Browder talking on the phone. When he noticed me and the expression on my face, he hurriedly said into the phone, I'll call you back later. After he hung up, he stood up and put a fake smile on his face. Well, Mickey, this is a pleasant surprise. Come in and sit down. He motioned me to the large sofa on one side of his office. I sat down and leaned towards him. This is not a friendly visit, Browder. I want to know what's going on between you and my wife. For a moment, it seemed to me that his gaze froze, but the smile remained on his face. Ah, Helen, what an addition your wife has brought to the business. She has a real enthusiasm for all the challenges that work here offers. Time and time again, I have seen her take a big problem into her own hands and solve it to a satisfactory conclusion. Indeed, just last week, I had the pleasure of conducting her performance review right on this couch. I can assure you that she was satisfied in every way. He grinned. I'm very grateful to have her working under me. The more I listened and looked at his smug smile, the angrier I became. This son of a bitch is making fun of me. He's bragging about sleeping with Helen in front of me. As I pushed against the sofa to stand up and face it, my fingers slipped between the cushions and touched something unexpected. When I pulled it out to look, I found myself holding thin panties in my hands. I looked at them again and gasped. There was no doubt about it. It was part of the set I gave Helen for Valentine's Day. Browder calmly reached out and snatched them from me. Well, looks like the cleaning crew is enjoying their job more than I thought, he joked. At that moment, the door to his office swung open and a uniformed security guard entered. "Ah, you're just in time," Browder nodded to him. Mr. Duncan was just about to leave. "Not so fast, Browder. You and I still have a lot to discuss." "Sorry, Mickey, but I'm afraid you've already taken up too much of my time." He gestured to the guard. "Please escort Mr. Duncan to the exit." The security guard came up to me and pointed to the door. I started to resist, but then I changed my mind. As I left the office, I turned to Browder. "It's not over yet, not by any means." I didn't see Frankie as I walked down the hallway. Maybe it was for the best. When I walked out to my car, I was still seething with rage. Once I was sure I hadn't missed Helen's call, I pulled out the card Detective Marshall had given me and dialed her number. When she answered, I was so excited that I stuttered. "Listen, you need to urgently come to the Browder agency and interrogate Darren Browder. He is having an affair with my wife and may know something about her disappearance." She sighed. "So this is your way of getting back to work and letting the police do their thing?" I shivered uncomfortably. "Well, no, but I've had my doubts about this guy for a long time. Anyway, I wanted to know if Helen showed up for work this morning." "Uh-huh. So your wife's boss admitted to having an affair with your wife?" "Well, not really, but he made fun of me about it, and I have proof." I told her about my wife's panties that were found in Browder's couch. "And do you have panties with you?" No, Browder snatched them out of my hands, but I'm sure they're still there." I heard her take a deep breath. "Okay, Mr. Duncan, I want you to listen carefully and do exactly what I say." "Sure, whatever." "I want you to get in the car and go straight to your office. When you get there, I want you to go about your business as usual and stop playing detective. Understand?" "But what about Browder?" "We'll talk to him, just like we did to all the other people whose names you gave us. But if you keep interfering, you're more likely to be a hindrance than a help. Now, do you understand what I'm telling you?" Now I sighed. "Yes, teacher, I understand. I will be good." She laughed at my tone. "Good boy. Now behave," and she hung up. When I got to the office, I had to tell Billy what happened. When I described my conversation with Browder, he could not hide his expression. "It's a good thing it was you there and not me. If he had started something like that with me, I would have knocked him out." "Yeah, but Detective Marshall is already mad at me. There's no telling what she might do if I hit Browder." The rest of the day, I tried to concentrate on work, but it was not easy. I started thinking about Browder and his allusions to Helen, and my blood pressure rose. Then I started thinking about Helen, and I became even angrier. I was so distracted that it was difficult for me to focus on business. As a result, I stayed late at work to catch up. Then on the way home, I stopped at a fast food place and got something for dinner because I didn't want to leave in case Helen showed up. But she was not there. The fatty food seemed to upset my stomach because once again I was tossing and turning all night. I dozed off for a while, then woke up and rolled over. Every time this happened, I remembered what I was dreaming about. This time my dreams were filled with Helen and Browder. Sometimes they humiliated me, sometimes they were in each other's arms and laughed at me. One day, even Detective Marshall showed up and started lecturing me. When my alarm went off at 6 a.m., I was glad to get out of bed. I had just finished breakfast when the doorbell rang. "This is Helen," I thought, and rushed to the door. But when I opened it, I was stunned to see Detective Marshall with a serious expression on his face. "Mr. Duncan Mickey, I'm sorry to say, but it appears we have found your wife's body." I recoiled, my voice stuck in my throat. The possibility had always been in my head, but I was so angry at Helen that I never thought we wouldn't have a chance to figure it out. "What? What happened?" Her face turned stony. "Let's sit down." She walked past me into the living room, and I followed her in a daze. As we both sat down, the mask on her face slipped, revealing her compassion. "I'm really sorry, but it looks like she was attacked and strangled." "Puppeteer," I exhaled. "Very similar to this. The behavior pattern is the same, and she lacks the rings." I shuddered. Pain washed over me, mixed with anger at the maniac who committed this terrible act, and anger at myself for the terrible thoughts I had about Helen before I found out what happened to her. "Where was she?" I asked. "We found a body in Burnham Wood." I was overcome with a cold. I played in these woods when I was growing up. I knew this area like the back of my hand. I looked at the floor so Marshall wouldn't see the worry in my eyes. "Mickey," she interrupted my thoughts, "I hate to do this, but we need you to come to the morgue to identify the body." I quickly looked up. "Are you saying there's a chance it's not her?" She reached out and took my hand. "You shouldn't hope. I'm afraid it's just a formality." I had nothing to say to this. She offered to give me a ride, and I decided to accept. At that moment, I was not sure that I could get behind the wheel. I've never been to a morgue before. It looked and smelled like a hospital, except that no one here gets well and goes home, I thought grimly. We entered the refrigerated room. It was her. The last time I saw Helen, her face was contorted with contempt. Now her face was relaxed, and I easily remembered how beautiful I thought she was when we got married. The only difference was that her cheeks, her lips, her whole face were a sickly white color, the color of melted wax. I turned away, not wanting to remember her like that. In the waiting room, the detective surprised me. "While we're here, there's one more thing to do. I need to swab you for DNA." "What? I do not understand why." "This is standard procedure. When we do the autopsy, we'll need to have your DNA to rule it out if we find traces of you, inside her." "Okay, I guess if it helps find the monster who did this." I turned to her. "I should probably start planning funerals." A sad expression appeared on her face. "The body will not be released soon. They'll do an autopsy first, then they'll keep it as evidence. They will notify you." I had nothing to say to this. When she dropped me off at home, she deliberately looked into my eyes. "We'll find the person who did this, Mickey. He will not escape punishment." I just nodded. After she left, I called Billy to tell him what happened. "Oh my gosh, Mickey, I can't believe it. It's like a nightmare. Listen, stay where you are. I'll come right away to be with you." "No, Billy, don't. I need you to call everyone who needs to know and tell them this terrible news. I just don't think I can handle it right now. And besides, someone has to continue to run things. Just give me some time alone." He tried to object, but I finally talked him into doing what I asked. After he hung up, I decided I needed to make one more call that Billy wouldn't think of. When I told Frankie the terrible news, I prepared myself for tears and the worst. Instead, I heard her sharp intake of breath followed by silence. Just as I was about to ask if she was okay, she suddenly cried out, "Oh, Mickey, I'm going to miss her so much." Then she wanted to know how I was doing. I thanked her for her concern and said that I would keep in touch with her. After we hung up, I shook my head. I always knew Frankie was different, but I didn't expect this reaction. Oh, well, people experience grief in different ways. Speaking of experiences, I tried to probe my own feelings. The shock began to wear off, replaced by what? I realized that I wasn't even crying. The more I analyzed my emotions, the more I realized that I was still angry. Of course you're angry at the maniac who killed your wife. But that was not all. I walked back into our bedroom and looked at Helen's closet full of her clothes. And then it hit me. I'm still mad at Helen. Maybe, I thought, I'm angry because she left me alone, even though it wasn't her choice. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I was still angry about the way she treated me. Disrespect is disrespect, and if she were alive, she would probably still continue to treat me just as badly. I felt the heat rise in my body and realized that I had touched a sore nerve of truth. Her death didn't change my feelings. I thought about her body lying there in the forest, trying to evoke sympathy. I couldn't do it. I'll have to wait, maybe I'll feel differently later. The rest of the day passed in a fog. I wandered around the house, doing small tasks to keep myself occupied. I noticed things on the shelf that Helen had bought, little trinkets that she thought were funny and I hated. I threw them in the trash. At one point, I went to the computer to check my email, but turned it off after seeing dozens of requests and expressions of condolences. I can't handle this now. When it got dark, I closed all the curtains and turned off all the outside lights. I heard once that this is a sign that the family does not want visitors. I knew I didn't want to see them, not now, and maybe never. When I finally went to bed that night, it felt strange going into the bedroom, knowing that Helen would never be there again. Mentally, I shook my head. Mickey, you're so confused. Strangely, I slept well that night, not bothered by any ominous dreams. Maybe you're still in shock. I got up, ate my cereal, and drank coffee for breakfast, then sat there trying to decide what to do next. Is it worth going to the office? Should I start answering all those emails? Or just stay hidden for the day? Before I could drive myself crazy trying to figure it out, I decided to turn on the phone. I didn't want to talk to anyone yesterday, and as I expected, my voice box was full. I quickly scrolled through the call list, and suddenly the phone rang. Probably more condolences, I thought, but before I clicked the ignore button, I noticed that the call was from Detective Marshall. It's better to answer. Mickey, her voice rang out in my ear. I wanted to tell you right away. We caught the ringmaster. What? Are you kidding? What happened? That bastard tried to kidnap another woman, but this time someone saw what was happening and called 911. We caught him before he could hurt her. The excitement in her voice died down. Look, I know it's little consolation for you considering Helen's gone, but at least we can get justice for her. No, everything is okay. It's great that you caught him. I mean, I wish it had happened sooner, but at least he doesn't get away with it. And he won't be able to harm anyone again, thank God. I thought for a moment, what will happen next? He is now under interrogation, and I was told that he made a full confession. This will probably be all over the news, but if you want to know anything specific, call me. Okay, Nora, thanks for calling. I'm still having a hard time processing everything that happened, but it's really helping. The next few days were a roller coaster jaw. On the one hand, he was trying to cope with Helen's death, but on the other hand, he was relieved that the monster who had harmed her and so many others had been caught. But the calm after the storm was not to last. I was working in my office when there was a knock on the door. Before I could get up, the door opened and Nora entered. She didn't smile. I have bad news, Mickey. We studied the murder of your wife together with the ringmaster. He says he didn't do it. I stared at her. He's lying, of course he did. Her expression did not change. He confessed to all the other murders, Mickey, told us details we didn't share with the public. But he swears he didn't kill Helen. But that's not all. We found his ring collection and took note of all of them. He didn't have Helen's ring. I don't understand. There's even worse news, Mickey. We ran a DNA test and compared it to samples found in Helen's body. They didn't match. But this is not the end because we found a match. Whose? Yours, Mickey. It matches your DNA. No, it is impossible. I shook my head in confusion. We haven't had sex for 2 weeks. She stood with her hands behind her back. Now she brought them forward, holding the handcuffs. With a look of disappointment on her face, she said, Mickey Duncan, you are under arrest for the murder of your wife, Helen Duncan. I looked around in horror, and then I noticed a strong policeman standing outside the door. Don't make this difficult, Mickey, she urged. I sighed heavily, then reluctantly held out my hands to her. At that moment, Billy ran to the door. What the hell is going on, Mickey? He shouted. I don't understand either, Billy, but I need a lawyer, okay? He nodded as Nora took my hand and led me away. The paperwork, the photographs, the fingerprints, everything passed by in a blur until I finally found myself in the holding cell, dazed and incredulous. Is this reality or just another nightmare? After a while, I heard footsteps approaching me, and when I looked up, I saw Nora Marshall standing behind the bars of the cell, her arms crossed over her chest. "Nora," I pleaded, "I didn't do it." She looked at me with sadness in her eyes, then turned and left. Later, the same officer who brought me to the cell came to the door. "You have a visitor, Duncan," he said sharply, and then Billy appeared. Mickey, I don't know what's going on. This must be some kind of terrible misunderstanding." "Did you manage to find me a lawyer?" "Yes, I received a recommendation from the firm that handles our corporate affairs. His name is Maxwell. They said he was very experienced, had represented a lot of criminals. A lot of people in your position." I shrugged off the awkwardness. "All I care about is if he can help me get out of here so I can figure out what the hell is going on." The next few weeks were crazy. Sometimes the hours seemed like an eternity, other days they flew by. I was indicted by a grand jury and arraigned before a judge where I pleaded not guilty. All this time I was in the city jail, slowly going crazy, trying to understand what happened to me. Maxwell, my lawyer, was not very reassuring. He, of course, knew everything about the criminal justice system, but he constantly asked me to make a deal with the district attorney. I refused, which led us to a bail hearing. I believed that if I could get out of this cell, I could somehow find out how I was framed and who did it. The DA didn't want me to go on bail. He referred to the monstrous nature of my crime and called me a fugitive. Maxwell pointed out that I have no criminal history and strong ties to the city. The judge compromised, setting bail at $1 million. "Max," I whispered to my lawyer, "where the hell am I going to find $1 million? All you need is 10% $100,000. You can mortgage your business." I was given the opportunity to confer with Billy after the hearing. "The business is half yours, so I hate to ask, but do you think we can do this?" He didn't hesitate. "No problem, brother. I know you're not planning on running to Mexico. Besides," he winked, "if you run away, you know I'll come for you." So there I sat that evening in my house, free on bail, desperately trying to imagine who might have killed Helen and why. Maxwell promised to examine all the evidence the state had against me to find weaknesses in their charges, but I assumed that this was unlikely to solve my problem. I had to believe that Darren Browder was somehow involved, so I tried to figure it out. He and Helen were cheating on each other, I was sure of it. Suppose Helen became too attached to him and began to make demands. Could he have killed her to get rid of her? Or what if Helen started blackmailing him? This could raise the stakes for him even more. Who else? I remembered the night Helen disappeared. She and Nancy went dancing at that club. Nancy said she met some guy and left Helen alone. But what if Nancy didn't leave? What if she and another guy decided to have a threesome with Helen and it all went wrong? Maybe, but it sounded pretty incredible. And speaking of incredible, maybe I should have thought even further. There was one person I knew who seemed to be obsessed with Helen, Frankie. Could she have met Helen that night and tried to convince her to leave me? Could she confess her love to Helen and be rejected? God knows Frankie was strong enough to strangle Helen if she wanted to. Could she be a murderer? But despite all the crazy scenarios I imagined, they all boiled down to the coroner finding my samples in Helen's body. I didn't want to admit it, but maybe I was a killer. Could I have done this and forgotten or pushed it out of my memory? As I thought back on that night, I began to remember things that I didn't like. There is no doubt that I got drunk that Friday, so drunk that I passed out. But could I wake up in the middle of the night, go out and do something so terrible that I didn't want to remember it? But how could I do something so evil and then do my gardening on Saturday? Am I some kind of cold-blooded monster? Oh man, that reminds me. Why were my work boots covered in mud when I went to mow the lawn? I'm always careful to clean up after my errands. What if Helen came back that night and I was furious? Could I have attacked her, strangled her, and then taken her body to Burnham Woods? This thought disgusted me. Then I remembered my dreams, the terrible rage I felt towards Helen, accompanied by dark visions of the forest and depression. But that was just my reaction to Helen being out all night, wasn't it? Isn't it? You have to stop thinking like that, I told myself. You need to get out of the house and away from all these reminders of Helen. I looked at the wall clock and saw that it was already 5 o'clock in the evening, so I called Billy. Hey, brother, how about we meet at Louis? I need someone to help me make sense of everything that's going on. He agreed and was already sitting in a booth in the back with a beer for me when I walked in. While we were drinking our first round, he told me what was going on with the business. Then, after he brought us the second round, he encouraged me to tell him what was on my mind. I told him that I had been racking my brain trying to come up with some explanation for what happened to Helen, someone else who might have done it. I told him all my wild theories and crazy scenarios, none of which explained why my DNA was the only one they found. Billy tried to cheer me up. I thought about it, Mickey. Maybe the lab technicians made a mistake. Maybe they found your DNA left over from the last time you and Helen did this. I bet they found her and didn't even look any further. I don't know, Billy. It sounds pretty far-fetched, and I don't know how I can prove it. I shook my head, and the room spun for a moment. Damn, how much beer did I drink? This is only my second mug, isn't it? Now I can't remember. I rubbed my eyes, and Billy stared at me. Are you okay, Mickey? Yes, I'm fine. Beer just creeps up on me. Maybe because I was sober in prison all this time. At that moment, my phone rang, and when I was able to focus on the display, I saw that Max Maxwell was calling. Hey, Billy, I need to answer this as my lawyer. I stood up and swayed as I walked out the back door so I could hear better. I had to lean against the wall to stay on my feet. Hey, Max, what's going on? He hesitated for a moment, and I wondered if I sounded drunk. Mickey, I just learned something that might help our cause. Do you remember the DNA test the police did? How can I forget this? Well, guess what? They only test a small portion of the DNA because that's usually enough to find a match. That's what they did with Helen. The DNA matched yours, and that was enough. The alley continued to move, so I tried to lean more firmly against the wall. Okay, Max, but how does this help me? What if the killer has DNA almost identical to yours? My head was really spinning. You mean I have a clone or an evil twin? Have you been drinking, Mickey? I'm not kidding. Listen to what I say. I tried to think, but nothing worked. At that moment, the door opened and Billy came out. There you are, brother, he chuckled. You better let me help you. He took the phone from me, put my hand on his shoulder, and I lost consciousness. My head hurt like hell, and there was a bitter taste in my mouth. I raised my head only to hit the tree behind me. Ouch. Well, it looks like the dose of Rawfil I gave you is wearing off faster than the first, Billy muttered. Last time I was afraid I killed you, so I reduced the dose. He shrugged. Actually, I'd rather you stayed asleep, but oh well. I shook my head, trying to clear my mind, then tried to get up. At that moment, I realized that I was sitting on the ground, tied to a tree behind me. Billy, what the hell is going on? Help me free myself. I don't think so, brother. I worked hard to bring you here. I do not understand what is going on. He walked up to me with a grin on his face. So here's what happens. You're filled with remorse for what you did to Helen, so you come to the forest where you kill her. You know you will be judged, so there is only one way out. You will take this gun, he held up the machine gun in his glove, and shoot yourself. It couldn't be simpler. I stared at him in bewilderment. You were the one who killed Helen. He laughed. I have long wanted to taste your wife, brother. I followed her to that club and saw how hot she looked when she danced. So when you came to me that Friday complaining about her going out with her bitch Nancy, I knew where to find them. Then it was just a matter of drugging you, driving your sorry ass home, putting on your work boots, then driving your car to singles and doubles. When I got there, Nancy was just leaving with some woman hunter. This left the door open for me to approach your loving wife, threaten to tell you all about her exploits, and take her away in the car. One small blow, and she was unconscious. When I took it to the forest, I decided that if it wants to spread, then why don't I try a piece? So I got mine, and it was great, let me tell you. But then she woke up and started screaming, and I didn't need that. So I shut her up forever. I gasped in horror. A big smile appeared on his face. The truth is, I knew this was going to happen all along. That's why I arranged everything so that you would take the blame. Looks like I did it pretty well. But you helped me. You agreed to mortgage the company to collect collateral. Why not? I wanted everyone to see what a devoted brother I was. Besides, I knew you weren't going anywhere. I was amazed at the transformation I witnessed and horrified by the story he told. The whole time I was listening to him, I was desperately trying to think of a way out of this situation. Listen, Billy, help me take these straps off, and we'll figure something out. You know, this suicide idea won't convince anyone. I can't shoot myself, tied like this. No, you can't, he chuckled, but I can do it for you. No, Billy, it will be obvious what happened. I have everything thought out. After I shoot you, I'll just take off all those straps so there won't be any marks on your body. Then I'll put the gun in your hand and shoot a second time in the air. They'll find you with a gun in your hand and powder burns on your fingers. With evidence like this, I don't think they'll even wonder why you didn't leave a note. His face became hard. Enough talk, brother. It's time to finish. Wait, Billy. At least tell me why. Why? Do you really have to ask? All my life I've been the little brother, the afterthought, the second-class one. You were Daddy's favorite, I was a disappointment. You were the star defenseman, I was on the second team. You got your MBA, I should have settled for college. Now he was pacing in front of me, his anger growing by the second. I thought maybe things would get better when I got out of school, but if something has changed, it's only for the worse. When Dad left the business, Mr. Burse, I have an MBA, became president, and I had to settle for working in the factory. Billy, you're the VP of operations. Shut up, he shouted. Everyone knew who was in charge, and it wasn't me. Then his voice became low and angry. And when it came to women, you could always choose. And who did you choose as your wife? The most beautiful girl in school. Why couldn't I have such a woman? Why did you have to take all the attention, all the recognition? He shook his head, as if driving away a bad thought. But all that changes tonight, brother. You will become a memory. But don't worry, they won't forget you. They'll remember you as the creep who attacked and killed his hot wife when he found out what a cheater she was. They won't know whether to laugh or cry thinking about you, and only I will know the truth. It's not just you, Billy. Police department, drop your guns. We both looked up in amazement to see the slender figure of Nora Marshall emerge from behind a large maple tree, a gun pointed at Billy's chest. To my amazement, Billy's voice changed completely. No, no, detective, you got it all wrong. I followed Mickey and discovered that he was indeed a killer. He came here to destroy evidence. I grabbed it and was going to call you. Yeah, she said evenly. Then she turned to the right. Patrolman Jenkins, was the voice recorder on your body camera working? A uniformed policeman came out from behind another large tree. Yes, ma'am. I wrote down every word. The detective turned to us again. Billy Duncan, you are under arrest for assault and murder. Now drop your weapon and put your hands behind your head. Okay, you win, Billy said and started raising his hands. Suddenly, he jumped towards me, fell to one knee and shot at the patrolman. The officer fell, and when he turned to Nora, I bent my knees and kicked him on the thigh with both legs. Losing his balance, he sprawled on the ground. With a furious howl, he sat up and pointed the gun in my direction, but before he could pull the trigger, a shot rang out, hitting him in the back and knocking him to the side. He groaned and shuddered, then froze. Nora ran up with her gun pointed at Billy. As soon as she reached him, she kicked him in the back. When he didn't move, she stepped on the wrist of his gun hand, pinning the weapon to the ground. It still didn't move, so she leaned down and gently pulled it from his fingers. Then she came up to me. Are you okay? She asked, breathless. I think yes. She handed me Billy's gun. "Keep an eye on him. I need to help Jenkins." Then she disappeared into the shadows. A groan came from the trees, and I looked up to see Nora helping Jenkins walk towards me. "Damn, I feel like I got kicked by a mule," he groaned. Her smile was more of relief than humor. "Think about how you would feel if you weren't wearing body armor." She then took out her phone, calling for help. As soon as she heard they were on their way, she came over and began to untie the straps that tied me to the tree. I really didn't think he would resist. I felt her hand tremble. "You reacted quickly when you kicked him." "I just reacted. There was no time to think." Then it dawned on me. "You need to talk to Max, my lawyer. He found something wrong with your DNA test." She shrugged apologetically. "Sorry about that. When the match came back positive, we didn't even think about the possibility that your brother would have almost identical DNA." I looked at Billy's body, lying crumpled on the ground. It felt right. Even at the end, he remained on the margins. I made slow progress in getting the house in order the way I wanted it. It took me forever to collect all of Helen's clothes and shoes. I had to rent a van to take everything to Goodwill. Same with the trinkets and little things she bought. Maybe someone else will like them, just not me. There weren't that many photographs, but it took even more time to sort through them. I didn't want reminders lying around, but how much of your past life do you want to erase? And those were just the photos of Helen. What should I do with the photos of Billy and me? In the end, I just packed everything up and put it in the attic. I'll decide what to do with them later. It wasn't until I got downstairs that the doorbell rang, and when I opened the door, I was surprised to see Detective Marshall standing there. Come in," I invited her, and she hesitantly entered to take a seat in my living room. "Everything is fine?" I asked. "Nothing." "No, no," she said hastily. "That's not the point. I just came to give you this." With that, she pulled Helen's wedding rings out of her bag. She shook her head. "Billy carried them in his pocket. He must have taken them from Helen when. Well, you know. Either way, we think he was going to plant them on you as further evidence that you killed her." She smiled slightly. "I thought you'd want them back." "Thank you, Nora. You didn't have to bother. Actually, I'm not sure what I want to do with them. I went through Helen's things, getting rid of everything I didn't want to keep. You understand." She nodded. Then she stood up abruptly. "Well, I've already taken up enough of your time, so I'll leave you to continue working." I stood up too, feeling that I had to say something, but not knowing what exactly. She paused and seemed to make a decision. She opened the bag again, took out a small rectangle of paper, and walked over to me, placing it in my hand. "Here is my business card with my number. If you want to ask anything, just call me." She looked at me carefully, then turned and walked out the door. I stood there confused. She already gave me one of her business cards, and she said everything was settled. I went to the window and watched her walk to her car. She really was an attractive woman. I looked at the business card in my hand again and smiled, then put it in my wallet. Gotta keep it safe. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.